Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Harbourtime Strategy Talks. I'm your host, Colin Harbour, and today is September 29th, 2020. Here in Dallas, we've got incredible weather. It finally cooled off a little bit. We had a big windstorm, but that's okay. You know, the wind, we can put up with the wind as long as the weather cools down a little bit. I want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody for listening and then watching the show as we added it to YouTube. This whole podcast thing was new to me. I've been listening to podcasts for a long time, but wanted to also take the opportunity to create one. And so, thank you for all the feedback. Some of it's been not what I expected, but I looked at it as constructive, and I really appreciate everything that everybody has had to say. So this is the last episode of season one, excluding a recap that I will do in a couple of days. So I'm going to take a break for a few weeks, explore ways to enhance the podcast moving forward, different things, different topics, even sound quality, video quality. There's a lot of different things that go into it that I'm going to be looking at. But for now, I think we've got a great episode in store for you today. One of the age-old questions is whether leaders are born or made. I'm sure it's a question that you've talked about before, you've discussed in school before, you've discussed in businesses before, you may have even discussed with your parents. I don't think we're necessarily going to answer that question today, but leadership is going to be the driving topic of today. It's difficult to think about, for instance, how a company, how a business could execute a strategy without some form of leadership, without someone taking on leadership. So leadership is just something that we see all the time. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of lack of leadership that we've seen, how it's affected a business plan, or read about how it's affected a wartime plan, or seen how lack of leadership affects a sports game plan. So that's something that's always front and center for us. Last night, I spent a lot of time reading leadership quotes. I looked up a lot of great ones. There's just too many to even try to bring it out. I didn't want to single them out. I am starting to post some on LinkedIn stories, which, by the way, if you haven't looked at LinkedIn stories, I encourage you to do that. It's like TikTok for professionals. So I'm very excited about that new product that LinkedIn's rolled out. But I've started to do a series of quotes that I'm rolling out, great ones from political leaders, a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of coaches, just a lot of inspirational leadership quotes. So leadership is a broad topic, and we can take several different angles. So today we're going to focus on it as business strategy and a couple of other things. So, today we have a very special treat. You're going to get two Harbours for the price of one. Mike Harbour is president and CEO of Harbour Resources Leadership Consulting. Actually, we're most likely related, not too far down the line. We haven't spent much time talking about that. We've generally talked about other things. But I first heard of Mike about a year or so ago, maybe not quite a year ago, when I started listening to his Lead Up podcast. And, I encourage you to look Mike up on LinkedIn or other things and Lead Up. And he might even be doing some other podcasts now, I think we've talked about. So we'll get to some of that. But hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Colin. Thanks for having me. One thing I was just thinking when you were saying we're probably related somewhere along the line. I hate you got the better gene pool than I did. You're better looking than me. So whatever Harbour genes you have, I feel like I missed out on that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, because not many people have accused me of being better looking than them. So I definitely think that. Thank you for joining us today. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So who is Mike Harbour, and what is Harbour Resources Leadership Consulting? And talk a little bit about maybe your podcast and some of the other things you got going on too. And we'll talk about it some more later, but let's do it from an introduction standpoint.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate that opportunity. I describe myself as just an old farm boy from Arkansas. I grew up in Arkansas. I live in Arkansas now. I've had the fortune of kind of traveling all over the country doing leadership development and training for various organizations. I spent 12 years in the U.S. Army, so I got to travel a little bit, not out of country. I never got shipped overseas, but I've visited a lot of different states, whether I wanted to or not, for the Army. And but what I like to do, Colin, is just say I'm a kind of a simple guy who likes to make the what seems like a very tough subject of leadership simple, relatable, make it easy for others to understand, and then apply. And so I've been doing that for a number of years, Colin. I started developing as a leader when I was 23 years old in the Army. I was given a book, first book I ever read, Colin. Somehow I made it through high school and college and didn't read a book. I took the Cliff Notes versions and did the bare minimum, but I was given a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People when I was 23 years old. It's the first book I ever read. I fell in love with personal growth and leadership development at that point. I was growing as a leader in the military. And so I kind of fell in love with developing myself, developing the skills as a leader. Soon started reading John Maxwell, who I've been a follower of John literally since I was 23. So over 25 years now, and been a student of John's. I've been personally mentored by him. I'm a partner with John on the John Maxwell team. Done a lot of different things with John. Just have a passion, Colin. You mentioned leadership quotes. I believe one of the greatest quotes I love is from John. He says, "Everything rises and falls on leadership." And I'm a believer in that. If I lead well, things are going to rise. Things are going to get better around me, my family, my business, my community, wherever I'm leading. If I don't lead well, guess what? They're going to fall. They're going to collapse. Those kind of things. So that's that's kind of the cornerstone for me around my own personal philosophy of leadership and what I attempt to teach. And then I do a lot of teaching on the Lead Up podcast. You mentioned it's a podcast I have that can be found on all the other listening platforms. But I've got over 200 episodes now where I do a lot of leadership teaching, just of 15, 20-minute teachings on different leadership principles that people can take and apply. I do a lot of interviews like you as well of different leaders to help people hear different voices and different ideas as well. So that's kind of I'm 50 years old. That's the 30-second, 1-minute version of a 50-year life. How about that?
Yeah, no, that's great. And you kind of covered one of the next questions, which is why leadership and why is a topic that you had focused on. But if you want to expand on that a little bit, I'd also, love to hear a little bit more about, a lot of people don't know this, but you and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I don't know. I think it's the Lead Up or maybe another one too that you're doing from a podcast perspective, where you're doing these daily, right? I mean, you are doing. I do it weekly, and I know others do it weekly or with less frequency, and it takes a lot to put together a podcast. So, let's talk a little bit about a little bit more honed in on why leadership is a topic you focused on. It sounds like we got to how it got your interest, but now and moving forward, why is leadership a topic you focused on? And then we might talk a little bit more about the podcast too, but why leadership is something you focused on.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes all the way back to, growing up in my home. I grew up in a very dysfunctional home, Colin, lots of dysfunction, lots of abuse, lots of alcoholism. There was a true lack of leadership in my home that, I was raised in. And so I was always searching for, I had this inside of me, I had this desire to be more, to have more, to do more, to be a leader. I always kind of pushed for leadership roles. I played football. I played baseball growing up. I even played baseball up through college. And I always wanted to be seen as a leader on the team. And often I was, but I wasn't really a leader because, when you grow up in dysfunction, you bring dysfunctional thinking into the way you lead others, right? And I was maybe considered a bully a little bit. Not that I went around beating people up, although I probably did that a few times too. It was more kind of verbal abuse, forcing myself on others, demanding excellence from other people, maybe even when I wasn't excellent in the things that I was doing or the way I was performing. And so I think why leadership really starts all the way back then. I grew up without leadership in my life, but I wanted more, and I saw people who led well in their lives, and so I wanted to learn more from them. And it was that it was a boss that I had while I was in the Army that really kind of took me aside. I think, Colin, we need mentors and coaches in our life, right? We can talk more about that on this episode, but it was a mentor that I had when I was in the military that took me aside and he said, Mike, you've got a ton of potential, but you got to learn how to develop it. You got to grow as a leader. Just because I thrived on being the example, Colin. Like if I just worked hard, I showed people what to do, I lead by example. I thought that was leadership, but that's not necessarily true. That's not always leadership. And what you'll find is you're the one doing all the work, but you don't have no followers. And so leadership is about having followers. And so I had to learn to lead. I had to learn to grow. And then when we look outside right now, just outside of our own domain, whether you get on the news or social media, the political spectrum, the world is on fire right now. It's screaming for leadership. And that's why leadership's so important for me. I've been doing this for a number of years, and I know I'm effective in where I'm working, but there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? The world needs leadership. They need leaders to step up and lead more effectively, coach and train other people to be more effective in their lives. And so, it's kind of those two bookends, the way I grew up and in the way the world is right now, that it's screaming for leadership. I think that's why leadership is so important for me to get better, but then also help others get better as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about my podcast this morning. It's a little bit off topic from leadership, but part of the reason I started it was to make myself better, right? When I started, I didn't know where it was going to go. So that concluding statement there kind of hits home on, I didn't know as much about your history. So that was, or your childhood and that sort of stuff. So that was interesting to lead, but or to hear, but you do make a great point. Now as much as ever, I don't know if it's more than ever, I don't know, but at least as much as ever, we need leaders now in industry. We need leaders in politics. We need leaders in families. We do. So that's why at the beginning, I was talking about it being such a broad topic and it can impact so many people. I work with several small to mid-size businesses, companies on various growth strategies. And as a strategy, in your opinion, where does leadership, quote unquote, or leadership development fit into the strategy ladder?
I think it has to be the tip of the spear, man, because you can have strategy, you can have vision, you can have goals, you can have all of those things that you want, but if you don't have a leader that can lead it, it won't happen. And, there's all kinds of different styles of leadership. So I'm not here to prescribe a style. I'm a values-based leader. I believe, we should lead with values because it makes everything else much easier if we do that. And I've done the other side where I wasn't a values-based leader. I was a, bold and boisterous and kind of a bullying type leader to force my way. And the task was more important than the people behind it. And so I think making that transition has helped me, Colin, and it's certainly what I teach today. But from a strategy standpoint, leadership it has to be your number one strategy to get better. If you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a corporate leader, you've got to get better as a leader. And when you get better as a leader, like I said earlier, everything rises and falls on leadership. You can lead more effectively because and this is from John Maxwell. John's got a book that he wrote many years ago that made him famous, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. But he teaches in that book the law of the pitcher. And what he says is in that law is people do what people see. And so if you're a leader, people don't catch. We've all heard this before, especially in our homes, Colin. People don't catch what you say. They catch what you do. And so leadership as a strategy has to be the tip of the spear. We have to develop ourselves as a leader to get better as a leader so people see what we do versus just hear what we say. If our words don't align up with our actions, then we're not a leader. We may be leading them in the wrong direction, but people are going to quit following us if our actions don't follow the words that we say. So, back to your question, I think leadership has to be the number one strategy to develop myself, number one, and then develop others. Because when other people are leaders, they're going to be more effective. They'll lead when I'm not there. I have a saying everywhere I go that I teach this: leadership's not what happens while you're in the room. It's what happens when you're gone.
Mhm.
So if you lead effectively, when you leave to go on vacation, or you leave to go to a meeting, or you leave to go somewhere where you can't be physically present with your team, if you've led well, your leadership continues when you're out of the room, when you pass the torch to someone else. If you haven't led well, then what happens is our employees begin to sit back and wait for us to come back because they
Sure.
don't know what to do, or they don't like us, and they say, well, I'm not going to work hard. Colin's not here. I'll just wait till he comes back before I work hard again. So being a more effective leader is vitally important.
Yeah, that's great. I think as you were talking about some of that, I was thinking about the good leaders that I've had from a business standpoint, the bad leaders, or maybe the not good all the time leaders. I mean, leadership is key, and particularly now, particularly when we have so many things that, the health environment, or the pandemic. We've got politics, which is, as crazy as ever. So leadership is key. And I think, we're talking about organizations and kind of the people leading the organizations. It's not a topic for today, but you can lead at any time, right? Anybody can lead. There's always going to be a time. You don't have to be the president to lead, or the general to lead. You can lead in a lot of different ways. Speaking of, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile a phrase, and I'm quoting this: great leaders know the way, show the way, and go the way. And I think part of that is what you were just talking about, but let's discuss that a little bit further. How can a leader incorporate all three of these into a routine? So knowing the way, showing the way, and going the way.
Yeah, I think, number one, knowing, it's not just about reading books and having some knowledge, right? It's also about taking some action so that I can learn the things that I need to learn. There's a lot of people, Colin, and right now you mentioned, I don't want to get into politics, but you mentioned politics and politicians. They do a great job of telling us what to do, but doing something completely opposite, right? I mean, they're so hypocritical in their leadership. So if you want to know what not to do as a leader, just watch politicians and do the opposite of what
Yeah,
they
that's
do.
true. I agree. And that's not a political statement. That's a general statement, right? About politicians. That's not a,
Yeah. I'm not. It's either side, both sides.
right.
Whatever, however you want to apply that. But knowing the way is number one. Having an understanding of leadership and a desire to grow. We have to grow ourselves. Here's what I know about most leaders, Colin, and this is most people. About 10% of the population, the general population, are self-developers, meaning they'll grow themselves, right? 70%, and this is not my statistics, this is a Forbes study, I believe, or maybe, it's an independent study by someone, but 70% of people, once they finish their formal education, never read another book. So if they went to school to be an accountant, they never read another book.
Hmm.
They continue their CEUs maybe, but most people never. And the people that do read books, maybe they're reading fantasy books or sci-fi books or things of that nature, not self-development or leadership development books, right? 70% of the population. And so once they finish their form, and if their formal education was high school, they've never grown past that point, right? Or maybe it's 2-year college or 4-year college or a PhD program. They never grow past that point. So when I think about knowing, it's continuing to grow past your formal education, learning things that are going to help you be a more effective leader. Look, I have a bachelor's degree in business administration. I got it back in the 90s. I guarantee you those things I learned in that 4-year degree program, they don't help me today. Business has changed. Leadership has changed. The way we deliver things has changed, right? You and I here are here on tech, using technology to communicate with one another. I've got to learn to be a more effective communicator virtually with people. That's a knowing piece, right? Knowing that I've got to change. And then showing is, okay, I've got to be the model. Right? That's that law of the picture I've talked about, is not only, Colin, can I talk to you about it, but I have to also show you that I've got to be willing to lock arms. I've got to come down from my ivory tower. You mentioned you don't have to be the president to lead. I don't think you have to have a title period to lead. You just have to have a desire and some courage to lead, right?
Mhm.
And step into that leadership role. So take your knowing, the knowledge, the things that you're learning, and step down from the ivory tower of what most people think leadership is, and lock arms with those that you're leading. And then when it gets tough, the going get tougher, right? That's kind of the knowing, showing, and going the way is when right now COVID has exposed people, Colin. It's exposed people who aren't self-developers. It's exposed people who aren't good leaders. The good leaders have been exposed, but more importantly, the bad leaders have been exposed as well because they haven't been growing themselves. They can't show the way. They've retreated. I'm working with all kinds of organizations that have people who have been in leadership roles that can't lead right now, and they're just quitting on the job. And they got to fire them. I mean, you got to have leaders that can lead people through this crisis. They've got to demote them or fire them and get somebody else in that can. But that's what I mean when I think about knowing, showing, and going. We got to develop ourselves. We got to grow past our formal education. We got to show. We got to lock arms with people and show them how to do it. And then we got to go when it gets dirty, hard, tough. We got to be right there in the middle of it with them. And that's how we gain respect as leaders.
Absolutely, I agree. I've always admired people who get their hands dirty while leading. They don't always have to stay dirty, but they get their hands dirty. They show the way, or they go the way a little bit, and then we can take it from there.
One of the just on that point, Colin. One of the best leaders I admired the most. I kind of hated the way he treated me and other people at times because he was tough, he was hard, he would scream and yell and cuss. But then what I respected is he would let that go and be your best friend, and then he would get in the ditch and get dirty with you. Now, we weren't digging ditches, but the work that we were doing is, I mean, this guy was a multimillionaire. He didn't have to do that, but he would come get dirty with me. And I respected that a ton from him because he had high expectations, and maybe the way he communicated those was really harsh at times, but he wasn't afraid to get down and get in the dirt with you, to show you the way and go the way with you when it was hard as well. And I still have a ton of respect for that guy.
Good. Yeah, I admire those type of people and respect those type of people as well. So then if you had to pick one, I may know the answer to this, I don't know, but if you had to pick one, who is your favorite business leader?
Oh, wow. There's so many of them. I think I have a ton of respect for Truett Cathy, who's passed on now. I don't know if you know who Truett is, the founder of Chick-fil-A. He's passed on now. And one of my favorite stories I heard about Truett is years and years ago, before Chick-fil-A became a household name, they were sitting in a board meeting, and his executive team was around him, and they were, Truett, we got to grow. We got to grow. We got to grow. The competition's opening more stores. They're outpacing us. They're getting bigger than us. And Truett was known as a quiet, soft-spoken, humble guy. But the story goes, he slammed his fist down on the table and he said, "Enough." He said, "Before we grow, before we get bigger, we have to get better." That was his quote. Before we get bigger, we have to get better. And the essence behind that is yes, if you want to grow, that's a good thing. I think I'm a growth-oriented guy. I want to get bigger every single day, but I also want to get better every single day. So if you're a leader of a business and you're wanting to grow your business and get better, to stand up different facilities or departments or whatever that is, make sure you're also coupling that with getting better from a value standpoint, providing the tools, providing the things that people need to be excellent. And look, if you go to Chick-fil-A, everybody goes to Chick-fil-A, not necessarily because their chicken's better, but because their service is better, right? That's an internal getting better process that was done intentionally 25, 30 years ago to make Chick-fil-A what they are today.
Yeah, Chick-fil-A, no doubt. I have two younger children, and so we spend quite a bit of time through Chick-fil-A drive-ins. Luckily, not as much as we used to because they've sped it up. They've got those things where, I mean, it doesn't. We were in Hattiesburg, Mississippi on our way to vacation. It was the same thing.
It's like they read your mind now. Isn't it? They got your order ready before you even order it, huh?
I know it is insane, and not to get off topic, but one of my daughters had a friend. We did something the other night, and I said, "Well, what do we want to eat for dinner?" She said, "Not Chick-fil-A, because I've had it 4 nights in a row." And I was thinking, of my kids on some weeks. So, but anyway, that's great. So then I want to go back to something I mentioned at the beginning, or in my dialogue, if you will, or monologue, opening monologue. What do you think? Are leaders born or made?
So the easy answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Some leaders, here's what I know. All of us are born leaders, Colin. All of us are born leaders. You were born, you weren't hatched, right? I mean, that's the smart aleck answer. We're all born.
Hmm.
I believe that we're all born to lead. Um, I'm a Christian believer, and I believe that I was given that command to go out and subdue the earth, go out and grow, go out. That's a leadership principle, right? Go out and make big things happen. So I believe that I was born to lead. Now, here's what I do know is some people are born with different talents, skills, and abilities than I was. Some people, I think I'm from Arkansas. Bill Clinton, one of our former presidents, again, I'm not getting political, but I think about he was born with the ability to communicate like no other person on planet Earth.
Right.
He great communication skills, could connect with anybody. That's a leadership skill. It's a charisma skill that he was born with, but I'm sure he had to also develop it. I'll be honest with you, Colin. I was not born with the ability to communicate well. I was a horrible communicator, and I was raised in a home where the communication in my home was violence all the time. That's the way I saw my parents communicate with one another. I didn't learn good communication skills growing up. It just wasn't modeled. So, yes, I was born to lead, but I had to develop the ability to communicate with others, which is a vital and it's the most important skill as a leader to learn to communicate with others. So, to answer your question, yes, I believe all leaders are born, but I believe the best leaders are made
Okay.
because what they do is they don't. I mean, just think about this for a minute, and all of your listeners will relate. Colin, I'm sure you know somebody that you were growing up voted most likely to succeed or best looking or whatever it was, right? Did that occur in your high school when you were
Yeah,
growing
yeah,
up?
they had all those accolades. Sure.
And maybe some of those people, they didn't succeed. Maybe they're the loser, what we would consider the losers in life today. I mean, I know people like that they ended up becoming drug addicts, or maybe they're in jail. Maybe they had everything going on for them, but they stopped. They relied on that level of growth, right? They had a certain skill or genetics they were born with, but they didn't develop it. So they didn't make themselves into a leader. They thought they were a leader and didn't make themselves into a leader. And so what I'm a believer in is that we're all leaders are made, Colin. You gotta be willing to say, I have certain skills, but I need to sharpen them. I need to hone them. I need to develop them. And so I believe the answer is leaders are made, not just born.
Yeah, and I think that I would agree for what it's worth. I mean, you always see children and people who hang out with your children who appear to be just natural leaders for whatever that may be in a childhood group. But to your point earlier, if you're not reading, if you're not sharpening the skills, if you're not looking at other ways to develop, then I think some of that is just going to go. Even if you're a natural, Bill Clinton, natural, great communicator, great leader, obviously to become president of the United States and those other things. But he fine tuned himself along the way. I guarantee it. He learned along the way. He
Absolutely.
read along the way. He talked to people along the way. So that's great. Well, this is good. So just kind of to wrap it up, then, if someone wants to reach Mike Harbour, they want to talk to you about, whatever leadership consulting or leadership development you do. What's the best way to do that?
I think the easiest way, obviously, is just my name, MikeHarbour.net. That'll take you to my website. You can find me there, my podcast. You can go to the free resources and find a link to my podcast, my blog, a lot of different information there on my website. So MikeHarbour.net. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn like you, Colin. I'm on Facebook, those kind of things. So you can find me on the social media platforms, Twitter as well. Harbor Mike is my Twitter handle. Those are probably the best places to find me. But either I hang out most of the time on LinkedIn or put a lot of tons of information out through my website,
Sure.
my my podcast, those kind of things.
Well, that's great, and I must admit it has been a little while since I've listened to your podcast. I rotate every now and then, and I found one actually that's very fascinating, and I had to get caught up on it. It's called Spectacular Failures. It may
Mm,
sound negative, but it's actually about businesses that didn't make it, that for one
mm,
reason or another made the wrong business decision, or there's economic factors. But these are, a lot of them are really great names, and they're great stories. And that's been a focus of my podcast listening. I wish I could listen to podcasts all day, but I can't. Well, this is great, Mike. I appreciate you joining us today, talking about leadership as a strategy, getting into some individual ways for people to develop. And, as far as the show today, I appreciate everybody listening. I appreciate you joining. And like I said, this is it for season 1. I'm going to do a wrap up in a day or so, and then take a few weeks off, but we'll be back with the second season soon. But for now, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Mike, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Colin. It was a pleasure.